She thought back to the words Cassandra said just before she sent her back to the clutches of the world beyond the darkness.
There's still something you need to do.
She understood now. The final piece of the puzzle was stood before her, offering his hand to take her from the veil and into the light of the unknown.
That's what you couldn't finish in life. You said you couldn't protect me. You've been here for as long as I have.
She sobbed as she came to the realization that she hadn't truly been alone in this void, just out of reach. Her hand shook as she reached out towards him, finally being able to feel his touch after so long.
It is really you. I am so sorry,
she cried as he pulled her into his arms, burying his face into the crook of her neck.
You're not alone anymore,
he whispered, as the darkness finally faded, as well as their seemingly endless story, which had finally reached its close. Cassandra woke to the sound of birds singing from the window of her apartment that morning. She wasn't in her usual state. She actually felt like she'd had a decent night's sleep, which hadn't happened for quite some time. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes as beams of sunlight shone through the window. Swiping her phone from the bedside table, she scrolled through the news feed of her social media account. Yet another engagement announcement and news of a baby on the way had been posted by people she used to know. With a sigh, she placed the phone back on its perch and pulled herself out of bed, making her way to the bathroom to shower. She hadn't checked the time. It hadn't even crossed her mind as she dove into her morning routine. Steam filled the room as she cleared her head, breathing in the droplets of moisture in the air. She remembered everything. Or did she? Reaching up to her cheek, she felt nothing. No graze left by careless antlers, or any trace there had ever been one. The whole time she thought she had been with a distant relative. Could she have been so drunk she imagined the whole thing, before stumbling into bed? Or was this Maud's plan from the beginning, hoping Cassandra would think it was a dream and let her get on with her life? Losing track of how long she had let her thoughts stew, she turned off the water and stepped out onto a towel she'd lay on the floor, drying herself off before she changed into her clothes for the day. As she left the bathroom, she heard the faint sound of a message tone from her phone in the other room. She brushed the kinks out of her hair and picked up the phone again. It was a message from Susan, asking her to pick up milk on her way into work. She checked her call history and noticed there had been no calls made from her phone the day before. Had their argument also been mere thoughts conjured up in her drunken state? She thought tea might help her feeling of weightless confusion. That was the only way she could describe it. Just before she managed to flick on the kettle to boil, there was a knock at the door, and she had a pretty good idea of who it could be. Obviously she expected it to be Tim. But no, it was his mum, Paula. "Oh, hi Paula," Cassandra said, slightly surprised by her sudden visit.
"Tim is working late. He asked if I could drop you off some bread and milk if I was passing,"
she said, holding a bag out towards her. As she reached out to retrieve it from her grasp, she noticed something she hadn't given much thought to in the past. Paula's eyes were just like Tim's, a gorgeous shade of deep brown. She didn't want to seem strange by gawking for too long, but she knew she had seen those eyes before. She cleared her throat, trying not to look or sound as awkward as she felt. "If Tim isn't too busy later, could you ask him to come by?" she asked. Paula flashed her usual sweet and welcoming smile.
"Of course. I'm sure he'll be happy to see you."
"Thank you. And thank you for the groceries. You're both far too kind," Cassandra replied. Maintaining her smile, Paula swished her hand in a shooing motion, as if her kindness was no big deal. She then turned to head back towards the stairwell, but Cassandra couldn't bear to let the sudden question fester until she spoke to Tim later on. "Paula, It might seem like a strange question, but can I ask you something?
Anything, Kath.
She said, turning back round to face her. Is there any Fulmores in your family? She asked, expecting her sudden thought to be shot down instantly, assuming it was just her mind trying to buffer its way back into the real world.
My mother's maiden name was Fillmore. How did you know?
Coincidence? Maybe. Or was Tim in fact a distant relative of Baxter's? It was like time stood still. She couldn't help but feel sorry for Paula, being the one to catch her in her disoriented state. Like a deer caught in the headlights, trying to wrap her mind around what was happening. Oh, you just remind me of someone I met once, she said, trying to bring herself back to the conversation. Paula must have been used to odd behaviour like this, as she seemed to just carry on like nothing had happened. Either that, or she was too polite to say anything.
Oh, okay. I'll tell Tim to come by later. It was nice to see you.
Yeah, it was nice to see you too, Cassandra said, watching her leave as she slowly closed the door, a smile stretching over her face. Standing there in silence, voices echoed in her mind. 2 voices, from 2 men, who weren't all that different.
I was there for her when she needed someone.
You know I'm here for you if you ever need to talk.
The day went by in a blur. She surprisingly managed to remember to pick up the milk at the shop as requested before heading to work. She must have been in one hell of a daze, because she was pretty sure she saw Susan smile that day. Not one customer had looked at her strangely for showing them the shockingly designed clothing, and she had actually managed to upsell quite a lot. Was any of this real? Or was this the actual dream? While the going was good, she also made use of her lunch break by reapplying for college, hoping she wasn't too late to send in her application. By the time the end of her shift rolled around, she had received an email stating her request had been accepted. What exactly was this feeling? Relief? Contentment? She wasn't sure, but she knew she had felt it before. A long time ago. She unlocked the door of her apartment, pushing it open as she removed her jacket, throwing it onto the armchair in the living room. She looked at the state of the room she was in, as her hands brushed over the small dining table. All the bottles from the previous nights still crowded the surface. Snatching up as many as she could carry, she popped them into the bin one by one, until everything was cleared. The hours ticked by as she gutted the rooms, leaving nothing untouched, and by the end of her cleaning spree, her mind was somewhat back to normal. Everything was spotless. She'd forgotten just how clean the apartment could be. With still no sign of Tim, she even had a go at baking. Neither Cassandra nor Catherine had ever been good at cooking of any description, but she considered her first batch of misshapen biscuits she pulled from the oven an absolute win. The scent travelled through the rooms, as the knock on the door she was expecting finally came. It was actually him this time, dressed in his professional attire, a pale blue shirt, black trousers and suit jacket. He looked at her as she pulled the door open. He didn't speak. He actually looked quite confused. Unknown to her, she was staring at him with a gaze that would probably make anyone uncomfortable. As he opened his mouth to speak, she leaned forward, wrapping her arms around him in a tight embrace. He stood there for a few seconds, seemingly unsure of what was happening, before he returned the gesture, placing his hands on her back to pull her close.
Another bad day?
He asked. Remaining in her current position, she spoke against his chest. No, today's a good day. Without even looking at him, she could tell he was baffled by the sudden situation. But he wasn't the kind of person to make moments awkward.
Are you sure? What makes today so good?
She finally pushed herself away from him, a warm and grateful smile gracing her face. I've just put the kettle on. Do you want to come in? He was still clearly confused, but he tried his best to hide it as he returned the smile, silently accepting her offer as he wandered into the room.